Hello, my name is Gavin and this is Genre Books. A piece written by a Pomeranian priest in the 1830s in order to ensnare some theologians turns out to be a horror book that was still hoaxing people nearly a century later. Mary Schweidler, the Amber Witch, sometimes just known as the Amber Witch, is an 1838 book from William Meinhold, who is that Pomeranian priest. It's his first work. It's only one of two works of fiction he produced. It was translated twice, 6 years after its publication in Germany, but the translation that people seem to favour most is the one that I read, and that is by Lady Lucy Duff Gordon, who is an interesting figure in and of her own right, but we can't cover that today. The Amber Witch remained a popular book for over the next half century. One of the best editions apparently is an 1895 English edition, and it's a work that still finds its way into some horror anthologies even till today, as seems to be the ultimate seal of approval for a work of literature. In the mid-19th century, an opera was made based on the book, and although that has faded into obscurity since its 1861 premiere, the book still gets mentioned. In the introduction to the Amber Witch, Meinhold relates how, in his duties as a priest in a village in Pomerania, he found one of the workers in the church tearing leaves out of a book. When he challenges this worker, he was told that his predecessor had told him that this book was worthless, and you could use it to clean up some of the wax from all of the candles in the church. Upon examination, Meinhold finds that this partially destroyed manuscript is a relation of events in the life of one of his predecessors in the job of priest. His name is Abraham Schweidler, and it is concerning the alleged witchcraft of his daughter Mary. The novel is set in the late 1620s and into 1630, at the height of the 30 Years' War, and it begins with the village being raided by a passing army. This action really does set up all the misery that follows for the rest of the book. Many are killed. The priest, unable to fight, takes the women and children into the forest. They find a cave and stay hidden. Many of the menfolk are killed. Many of the remaining women and children are killed. Half the town is burnt out. The crops are destroyed. The place is looted. They have nothing left. We can see here the beginning of the finger pointing and resentment that is to follow. And we can also see here the level of superstition that the remaining inhabitants of the village have, and which are encouraged by the priest. A dropped loaf from the departing army is seen as a sign of providence, close to manna from heaven. Birds caught in the snares they make out of twigs are seen as gifts from above, rather than the efforts of the villagers themselves. Now, it has to be said, at this stage of the book, it all looks pretty authentic. It's authentically grim from the historical perspective of the war that was going on at that time. It is plausible that Meinhold has found this manuscript, as he is the priest of this village in Pomerania. Considering that the book is written in the mid-19th century, the language seems to be authentic to the 1620s, 1630s. I don't know how much this loses in translation from the German to the English, but the style certainly takes some getting used to, and from the little I know of German, that construction of the sentences of the book and the German sounds familiar, and certainly in the depiction of villagers as religious, suspicious, superstitious, this seems to, amateur modern eyes to have that veneer of authenticity. And it was definitely convincing in the mid-19th century when the book came out as well. The village gets no help from external agencies, so the church turn them away. Abraham Schweidler is going out writing letters to whoever he can think of, but the local nobility turn him down. The sheriff of the area refuses flat to lend any aid. Starvation sets in. When finally the sheriff does make an appearance, again no help is offered, but Abraham's daughter Mary takes his eye and he becomes quite smitten with her. She wants nothing to do with him. He is presented as quite an unpleasant guy from the outset. He is also the former lover of another woman in the village, Lizzie Colkin. Lizzie is a nasty piece of work. Again, this is unambiguous from the beginning of the book. However, there is now a reason for enmity from her towards Mary, and she works in cahoots with the sheriff in order to give the illusion that Mary is practicing witchcraft. There's not much that remains to the villagers, but what does is very precious. So when a crop fails, it's near disaster. Some of the few remaining cattle become ill, and there is at that time an old wives' tale that the actions of a maid in plucking some hairs from the tail of one of these sick animals and burying them under a certain tree will cause the animal to get better. Mary is the only maid left in the village, everyone else either being married women or children. She does as she is bidden, even though I'm not entirely sure she believes that she can do anything really to help. But the animals get better, and then some of them don't get better. When it's obvious that she can't help, they start to blame her. Then people start getting ill. One little girl, Mary's goddaughter, suffers an attack which presents itself as a possession, and as I read The Exorcist last week, this seemed an eerie echo, and quite a few of the same symptoms. But Mary is blamed for this as well, and the only person that can perform an exorcism is her father, and they won't let him near the girl. But the reader can see that at every stage Lizzie Colkin is inserting herself into the action, guiding what follows. That's the witch part. The amber part. Mary finds a lump of amber in a forest. This leads into the witch narrative for a couple of reasons. They don't want people to find out about the amber, but they sell a large chunk of it in a nearby town. They buy lots of provisions for the village. They come back and they distribute those provisions. Seed corn for the fields, some basics in terms of food and clothing for the people. Initially happy to receive this generosity, they then begin to question where the funds have come from to do this. The answer, obviously, is Mary is a witch. Mary is clever. She speaks Latin. She speaks Greek. She is devout. She's the daughter of the priest. She's also about as naive as they come. And in order to buy a book for her father, a book he has been wanting to get for a number of years, she goes out to where this amber was found. There is a vein of amber in the ground, and she chips away and gets little extra pieces of amber and begins to save up to buy him this book. Unfortunately, this is a young maid already under suspicion of witchcraft who is going out in the middle of the night. Now, she has more than one suitor in the sheriff. The sheriff himself has actually presented one of his, I think his head huntsman, as a suitable wife for Mary. She's turned him down without even realising that the sheriff doesn't really want her to marry the huntsman for the sake of marrying the huntsman. He wants to marry the huntsman so he can do what he likes with Mary himself. She also has a not unwelcome suitor in the form of the son of a local nobleman. Matters come to a head, and Mary is arrested on suspicion of witchcraft. And by suspicion of witchcraft, I mean, as you can imagine, they've already made up their minds. She's brought to trial. Her knowledge of Latin scares them. She utters a prayer to call out to God or save herself when she is arrested, and people are backing away. They don't understand Latin. They think she's calling on the devil. When she starts speaking Greek at a certain point, even the nobility and the people who are putting her on trial, who speak Latin and don't speak Greek, think the same thing. Others seem to think it's just witchcraft that a woman can speak Latin or Greek in the first place. You probably won't be surprised to learn that a trial for witchcraft in Pomerania in 1630 is not quite the same as a civil trial you will find in the Western world today. It's far more akin to the worst things people think of the Spanish Inquisition, and although she is able to refute their arguments at the trial, she does relent and confess when confronted with the prospect of being tortured, knowing that she's already going to be found guilty. She is already going to be burned at the stake. Why put herself to the additional agony of torture, especially in front of her father who is, to be charitable, ineffectual? The amount of times both Mary and Abraham faint at provocation, it almost borders on the amusement. But he doesn't have a lot of power, he doesn't have a lot of agency, but at the same time you think there are things that he can do and chooses not to, or doesn't occur to him. As a side note about Abraham as well, he has a very strange relationship with what's going on here. At times he almost gets convinced that his daughter might be a witch anyway. He does realise that she is being set up, and being set up by Lizzie, and he accuses her of being a witch. It isn't that he's so enlightened that he doesn't believe in witchcraft, he just doesn't think that his daughter is capable of it. And the book itself, this is written from the perspective of Abraham, certainly presents witchcraft as being real. But it's representing things as being real, which is really at the heart of this text, because this manuscript, this story, is not real and is presented as such. So why is William Meinhold, this priest, lying? The whole fabrication is a trap for a group of theologians. Prominent amongst this group is a man called David Strauss, who at the time of the 1830s, slightly before, is instigating a new kind of biblical research, and it's looking at Jesus as a historical figure, not necessarily as a man of flesh and blood, a non-divine figure, but a historical entity, and treating him as such, and not taking the sometimes contradictory stories of the Gospels as gospel. Meinhold's plan appears to be create a story, have them believe the story and make historical inquiry into it, and then turn the tables on them and reveal that it was all a hoax. Meinhold trails this somewhat in the introduction to the first edition of the book, where he says that because this was a partially destroyed manuscript, he has sometimes had to intervene, but he won't tell people where his own words end and where Abraham Schweidler's words begin. But in the late 1840s, when another version of the book is presented, he comes clean and admits the whole thing's a fabrication, because the job has been done. The theologians have fallen for it and thought that this work was real. I don't quite buy the extrapolation from this that therefore everything else these theologians do is then being hoodwinked by somebody. But there you go. This is the best Meinhold had to offer. So the cat was out of the bag, but in a limited and specific way, because this confession that it's a fabrication didn't make it into all the subsequent translations, and it certainly didn't affect the copies of the book in English that were already out there. In the August 1925 issue of Weird Tales, the writer Seabury Quinn writes about the trial as if it was historical fact. He cheekily excises William Meinhold from the story at all. He doesn't credit the author of the entire piece. He just talks about Abraham, Mary, and the events of the book. So this was an unintended consequence on the Meinhold's part, that some 80 years later we still had people falling for this and presenting it as truth in a periodical. So as a hoax, it works. As a piece of horror fiction, it doesn't do a bad job either. Although the modern reader will discount the witchcraft that Abraham certainly believes in, I don't think Meinhold believed in it. The true horror comes from the actions of the humans in the story. The passing horror of the possession of Mary's goddaughter, I possibly am influenced by the fact that I've just read The Exorcist last week, but that certainly made me sit up and pay attention. It's presented in a very similar way, speaking with multitudinous voices, going completely stiff. So that is, scary from that perspective. But the helplessness of Mary when confronted with a witch trial and the ultimate punishment looming of being burned alive is, I would say, horrific enough for anything. Lizzie Colkin is depicted as a real witch. She is not enlisted as help by the sheriff because she can help in various ways. She's being asked to perform her witchcraft in order to pin the blame on Mary. The witchcraft takes place, but the real horror is in the reaction to it, how quickly a populace is swayed. And the final horror for the modern reader is knowing that in some communities this kind of belief can still hold sway. Anyway, on that cheery note, until the next time.